So this is going to be the first video on my channel of a topic that I'm very interested in. So I'm Sage and Melcher. The epithet I'm going by is as the Planetary Prince. Kind of a outlandish epithet, but there's meaning behind it. We'll get into it another time. The topic I wanted to discuss today is that of the racial distribution of the races in our history. And I know this is very controversial, why I wanted to touch on it, because I think if we have a basis and foundation on which to base our worldview, the world kind of opens up to new possibilities. And why I feel like this is important is that it brings a sense of belonging into the world, and eventually leading to the realization that the earth is our inheritance, passed down from our ancestors unto us. Well, you'd have to know who your ancestors are to receive this inheritance. Many are like orphans, wandering, complaining about your mommy and daddy, and have no connection to your ancestors, or to the forefathers. So, why I'm making this? It's for you, not for me. So, I'm going to start this story 30,000 years ago. And at this time, 30,000 years ago, I think our history books have it as man as barbarian, savage. And there were many savages and barbarians. But understand that the word barbarian only means bearded, the bearded people. And there was a distinction between bearded races and non-bearded races. But there was also a distinction between civilized and evolutionary races. A lot of the evolutionary races, such as the Neanderthal, the Denisovian man, Cro-Magnon, not so much Cro-Magnon, but that's another story. The Denisovian, Neanderthal man, and even you see it in the Aboriginals a lot of the time, that the lack of facial hair. These were indications of the strains that came from the evolutionary races. And then you had what the Romans called the Berbers, the barbarians. These were which just means bearded ones. And I'm going to break off into where these distinctions occur in the various strands, as well as the colored races: red, yellow, blue, green, orange, and indigo, black, with black being the last one to coming onto the scene. So the first race that we're going to touch upon is the violet race. Violet race will stem from the Aryans. These beings had brunette hair and blue eyes, and they were the first of civilized men. Aryan just means civilized or noble, just like in the 4 Aryan truths of the Buddha. And the symbol which these Adamites later adopted was the 6-pointed star. We see this later on as a carrying on of this lineage. The violet race has the specific mission because they come from the Mesopotamia area, between the Tigris and Euphrates. This is the cradle of civilization. And nowadays, it doesn't look like a cradle civilization. It looks like barren sand and desert, and it looks all worn out. But this is post-diluvial. And diluvial means an event that happened in the Earth's history of a deluge. When poles have shifted and civilization is starting fresh. This becomes a new area. And the Adamites are the ones who have predominantly settled in Mesopotamia. They were the first priesthood. And the founding father of the Adamites were Adam. He had twin sons, Cain and Abel. As we know the story, Cain slays Abel. Cain, being the firstborn, is then exiled into the land of Nod. And the Nodites are the next lineage I wanted to discuss. Their primary center of civilization was near the Caspian Sea. This is the Caspian Sea. And they primarily resonated around the east of the Caspian Sea, later going north into Kazakhstan and into the Rus. Some migrated west into Ukraine, to the north of the Black Sea, and later into Germany, Czechoslovakia, and the Netherlands, Poland, etc. The Nodite culture. The Nodite culture is the civilization that was here before the deluge, before the earth catastrophes. They were the culture that established the first writing systems, the root language, where we get our alphabet from. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And this culture of the Nodites, they're the ones who've established the priesthood. They're the ones who the Adamites serve. And their center of culture before the deluge is known as Dalmatia. And this was an original Garden of Eden they called Paradise, which existed somewhere in the North Pole. It's interesting because the Phoenicians, who were descendants of the Nodites, their name of their paradise that was lost, they called Hell. And later, when the Roman Catholic Church took over to diminish anything that was not of Catholic origin, the name Hell was bastardized. But Hell was the name of the place of the origin of these Nodites. So now, when the Nodites blended with the Adamites and with the evolutionary races of the colors, the red men, the yellow men, the blue men, the green man, the orange man, and the black man. This is the beginning of the Andinites. And Andite cultures were the seafaring cultures that traveled all around the world. They even traveled to the Americas through the canals and the system that was here. They migrated down. There's evidence of this culture establishing themselves even in the Great Lakes, Florida, the Fertile Crescent, the Andites migrating into the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. All these areas used to be above sea, and we can see in their landmass that this used to be a fertile crescent. Andanites were the ones who we would call Aryans and Phoenicians. And they intermingled with the races that were here, specifically the red man, who was the first of the evolutionary races and the firstborn. The red mans occupied the Americas. And they were the first to have arrived here by crossing the Bering Strait. The Bering Strait is the landmass that connects Russia, north of Mongolia. All of this used to be one mass that was able for access. You can see how this used to be above water. This was elevated. This is of a deeper depths and a greater abyss. The red men crossed the Bering Strait and were pushed out of Asia by the yellow race, the Oriental man. And then, when the landmass closed, America became its culture of civilization. Now, we have the Andanites. The Andanites were another name for the Aryans. These were a seafaring civilization that primarily existed along they were northeast of the Caspian Sea, but they migrated into Iceland, Finland, Greenland, and Eurasia. They were a seafaring civilization, which would later be known as the Phoenicians, where we get the name Finland from Finn and Vin, Finnish. The seafaring culture traveled all around the world, and the Andite symbol was that of the swastika. You see the swastika even in India, like in it says Krishna, who comes from Dwarka. He had his symbol of the swastika on his chest as a symbol of the Aryans. And this culture, which was a seafaring culture, they were known as the Adamites. Here's Dwarka. And all this landmass used to be above water. And then through climatic changes, it then became flooded. But these cultures used to do trade through traveling the seas, through with Africa, with the Persian Gulf, Mesopotamia they had access, Ethiopia, Yemen, even Egypt through these narrow straits. And these Andites, wherever we see the swastika, we see their origin. They traveled the seas, even the Hawaiian Islands. They were known as the Polynesians when they mixed with the evolutionary races. So know that the Aryans are not pure Nodite culture. The Nodites were the ones who established the beginning civilization. But the Andite Aryans were those of the Nodites who mixed with the Adamites, the line of Adam, of the violet race, and with the evolutionary races, primarily the blue, red, and yellow races. These were said to be the Aryans, the men of renown. As told in the Bible, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men and had children of renown. Now, the evolutionary races is a topic for discussion. Of the evolutionary races, there were 6 that we can clearly distinct, and they were races of color. The first of the evolutionary races was the red man, and his primary place of residence was in the Americas, in Northern America, and before even the Adamites, there was the red man. He was pushed out of Asia by the yellow race, the yellow race were the Orientals, who had their primary residence in China, Xinjiang, going into Mongolia and into the borders of Tibet. The red man and the yellow man have been at war, and the yellow race, through years, thousands of years of fighting, pushed the red man back to where this was when there was a landmass from Russia to the Americas called the Bering Strait. And as we look, this landmass, all of this used to be above water and was accessible by the red man. Then through climate change, the landmass sinks and it becomes submerged. And now the red man has his own residence within the America, will later become known as the Native Americans and the Indians and those with the red skin, which the Americas was known as the land of the red man. The yellow man being on the other side of Asia. Now we have the blue races. These were the races that predominantly were scattered all over Europe. And the original man, one of the forefathers for the evolutionary races, was the Neanderthal man, which he's more known now as the Denisovan. The blue man had his residence in Europe, but because of such intermixture with the Neanderthal man, there was a degrading of the stock of the blue race over time. Later, the Andites, the Andite Aryans, they blended with the blue man because of their superiority, and they blended with the Adamites. And this is where the line of great nobility comes from, those who hold such superior genetic strains. You understand this framework of the races before we get into the history. It's important to understand pre-Dravidian India as well. This was the Indus Valley Civilization, which had many major rivers flowing it, such as the Ganges, Yamuna, and Saraswati. Saraswati is now dried up. Ganga and Yamuna still remain, but they originate from the Mount of Kailash, which had 4 rivers. I think the last river is the Brahmaranda. and they flow out like a swastika, which was the symbol of the Andite Aryans. The Indus Valley civilization is pre-Dravidian in that they had a culture which was an intermixture of many races. It was a mixture of the green race, it was a mixture of the orange race, and a mixture of the indigo black race. And just like the Mediterranean Basin, they were able to embrace every single culture upon Earth. These were the first inhabitants of India, and why India became such a cradle of civilization as well. To know, just to have the framework to understand our Earth history, is the Saharan Civilization. So in Sahara, boom, all of this used to be a landmass. It used to be fertile. It used to be water. It was green. Those who were here had a name. These darker races were known as Malacca. And you go to India, or I've heard even in Mexico, these tribes of the darker races, they're known as Malacca. But the Saharan civilization was the indigo black race, and it carried the submerged strains of the orange and the green races. Now, the orange and green races in Egypt, they were primarily fighting each other, and through war they exterminated each other, and through intermixture the newest race, the last of the evolutionary races, was the dark race, indigo, black, and they absorbed the fighting clans of the green race and the orange race, which gave rise to the Saharan civilization. Now, just like the Indus Valley, which had a polyglot of numerous races, the Mediterranean Basin, it's important to understand that this was an intermixture of all the races. So you have the Saharans from the south, the indigo black. You had the blue man from the north, the European, which became the white races. And you had an intermixture of the Adamites and the Nodites from the east, which brought the culture, which later became the culture that was preserved in Abrahamic traditions in the Judaic, Christian, and Abrahamic faiths. That culture is still retained. And this area of the Mediterranean Basin, combined with the Andite Aryans, which navigated the seas, which they had access to because they had this entire strait under their dominion, such as the cedar trees in Baalbek, Lebanon, was under the control and dominion of the Aryans. So sea travel through Cyprus, through Italy, Sicily, they pollinated and it became a mix. This is why there are races in different skin colors in northern Africa that have white skin compared to the more darker Africans the farther south you go, the darker skinned. And I'm say at this time, we were to compare this to our view of history, this sets the stage of civilization. Understand, these were here. And it was about 30,000 years ago. Don't quote me exactly on this, but this is just about the stage that's being set. And I'll get more into this history as we evolve, but understanding the races that were there, the Nodite culture, the ones who established the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, etc., which became the Phoenician alphabet, understanding the Adamites, which was the violet race with the blue eyes, which intermingled with the Nodite culture to create the Aryans. This was the seafaring culture that extended around the world. And you have the 6 evolutionary races: the red, blue, yellow, green, orange, and indigo, black. So that's the stage that's set.